Well, after 5 weeks off, MotoGP has finally returned from the summer break, and we're in Austria for the first of a doubleheader around the Red Bull Ring, and I reckon this will be a short one because not a lot happened, did it? Except, well, everything happened, actually, quite frankly. Even before the weekend track action kicked off, we had it all. To delve into it all is myself, Harry Benjamin, Keith Huewen and Pete McLaren, as always. I think the place we have to start off first with is the news that after 26 seasons, 115 Grand Prix victories, 89 of those coming from the Premier class, 9-time MotoGP World Champion Valentino Rossi will be retiring at the end of this season. Keith, let's come to you first. We kind of saw this coming, really, didn't we? But also, that doesn't make it any more of a poignant and sad day, really, because he is MotoGP. He put it on the map.
We all have a lot to thank Valentino for. I mean, he's a mega personality. You see, if you're as old and as long in the tooth as I am, you remember Barry Sheene and the likes of. I even remember seeing Mike Hailwood at Donington Park when he came back. I mean, there are these icons through our sport that we can remember really with huge love, and I mean Valentino has been the top one of all, I think, really. I mean, he is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. You know, results wise, I don't think you can ever mix up your eras. I think an era should be held in its own era, not Mike Hale was the best because of this, or Agostini was the best because of that. I think that you've got to really look at the era that he's racing in, and Valentino, the last 2 or 3 years, he's racing in probably one of the toughest eras there's ever been. The toughest era there's ever been. I don't think I can even qualify that. I think it is the toughest it's ever been across the board, in depth, from a machinery point of view, from a racer point of view, from a preparation point of view. This is the toughest MotoGP, the toughest Premier class motorcycle racing era that there's ever been. And Valentino's 42 years old. It was the right decision. It came at the right time. I would love it to be he finishes a year with some great result somewhere during the course of the year. If it rains and he gets an opportunity in the next 8 or 9 Grand Prix, however many there are left for us by the time the pandemic's finished with us. But when I say that we owe a lot to Valentino, he has made the sport global in its appeal across nations, across continents. He's a bit like the David Beckham, the Manchester United, whatever you want to call it, of our sport. Everybody knows who Valentino Rossi is. Branding. You only have to, you can drive through my town here, Northampton, where I am at the moment, and you will come across, in your trip across town, a little yellow 46 in the corner of, the Triumph Herald with a 90-year-old bloke driving it, or Mr. Builder's van. He just has that appeal. The big worry was that he was going to hurt himself. Trying. I mean, did he deserve a 10th World Championship? Deserve doesn't work. I've heard that he deserved it, but no, it is what it is. Should he have won a 10th World Championship? Yes, he probably should, but you can go back to the time when Nicky Hayden pipped him after a mistake that he made. There are other times that the Valentino lost championships when he should have won them. 7 MotoGP World Championships, 125, 250, all the motorbikes that have been in the Premier class across all the changes, he's ridden from 500cc 2-stroke right to where we are now with 1000cc 4-strokes. The bloke has been phenomenal, and there isn't anybody in the paddock who doesn't respect him. The bad things that he's brought to the sport, for me, is tribalism. I think the Yellow Army and the like, I find wrong in sport generally. I think that you can be a fan of the sport. You don't have to be against everyone else just because you're a fan of Valentino, but did seem to develop in that situation, and of course reached ahead when you had the red colours of the 93 and Marc Marquez. I'm thinking of 2015 when they had their coming together in Sepang, which is a great shame, because I think the sport is better than that and bigger than one person, although it didn't look like it was for some time. Valentino was bigger than the sport for a long time, but I think it's come back into context now, and I think that our sport is the biggest thing. There's no one individual at the moment that heads off the quality of our sport.
And I think you've said it before. In fact, actually, that all the other riders have Valentino Rossi to thank, because they get paid the big bucks now because he was there putting it on the map and making it bigger and bigger every single year he was there. And in fact, everybody had something to say about the retirement and his announcement, didn't they? Even past bitter rivals had something good to say.
My favourite, Max Biaggi, who finally explained the little dust up and the pushing and shoving on the podium back in Barcelona some time ago. I think it was it in Barcelona? And then, of course, Casey Stoner. I thought Casey Stoner's words were very gracious indeed, which, of course, underlines what I've always said about Casey Stoner. He is a good bloke, as well as one of the best ever motorcycle racers there's ever been. Basically, Casey Stoner is his own man, says what's in his head, and this week, in his head, was all the accolades that he felt about Valentino Rossi, which I thought was very gracious. But Max Biaggi was the one I thought we might see some fireworks. But even Max was very kind as well in the way that he spoke about Valentino.
And that's just so telling, isn't it, Pete? And also, though, there was a rumour that maybe he might cling on to another year with his own team, of course, VR46 fully debuting next year. He did bring that up. He said it was a possibility, but in the end, he decided it wasn't worth the risk.
One of the surprises about this announcement was that they did such a good job of just stopping any leaks. You know, even as he walked into that room, it was pretty much 50-50 split. You can imagine the phones of all the journalists are lighting up with WhatsApp chats of he's going to do this, he's going to do that. And honestly, people didn't know, you know, and as he was stood there, some Ducati management came in. So, of course, then people, maybe, you know, it's to announce that a Ducati deal. Now, of course, it turns out they were just there out of respect to Rossi, if you like. But, you know, people literally didn't know which way this was going to go right up to the moment when, you know, he said this will be, you know, the end of this season. You know, fantastic job to do that. I think the overwhelming thing for me generally was just how it looked like it was a weight off his shoulders almost. You know, sometimes these retirement announcements can be quite sad, somber, you know, tearful events, if you like. And it didn't look like that. You know, he, from the moment it started, and he made a bit of a joke about, you know, being embarrassed that he had, you know, sat up there on his own, he needed a table or something. And it was kind of that old Rossi with the sort of the charm and the charisma from all that make him so famous. You know, it looked like that again, which we haven't seen that much this year in his normal media debriefs, I have to say, because it's been such a sort of a frustrating and disappointing year. So, yeah, I think, and that really showed that it is the right time, as Keith said. You know, it shows that he accepts that decision that he's made, and he's not doing it in the sense that he feels somehow forced to retire or anything else. You know, this is what he believes is the right thing to do at the right time. He said, yeah, he could have gone on. He had the chance. He joked that, you know, the salary would have been good with his own team because he talked with himself about it. But he said, look, in the modern MotoGP era, no matter which bike you change, if you're not, you know, staying with the same bike, you need 2 or 3 years to really get used to that bike. And so that was just too much of a commitment at this stage of his, you know, his life, his career. If it was just one more year, if it was the same bike, well, maybe that, you know, maybe, who knows. But that was why he opted not to go with his own team.
Talking about the press side of it, the reason why it was probably kept as quiet as it did, you remember the debacle, was it Le Mans, when the Jerry Burgess situation was, when he basically was firing his crew chief, and it all got out there in a massively messy, disrespectful, horrible way. And they kind of had to cover that up. I think he might have been pretty mindful of the fact that the mess that they made PR-wise of that. And again, pictures of him and his girlfriend on his new yacht. You know, once you've laid out and you know, on your boat, nice and calm, you're right about how he looked in the press conference. Valentino's face can look like a 30-year-old or a 50-year-old, depending on the pressure. He definitely has one of those faces that you look in the back of the garage sometimes and you think, look at him. And then another day when things are going well, he looks 10 years younger. Well, at that press conference, Pete, you're right, he looked 10 years younger. He looked very relaxed, very calm. It was just a little hint of emotion there. You could just see it in the corner of his eye at one particular point. I remember thinking, I thought Steve Day, who is MotoGP.com commentator, I mean, and he handles the press conference. I thought Steve Day was very good how he collected Valentino up, and I thought the normally excruciating questions that the general press ask at those kind of things were quite good as well. I thought it was even Simon Patterson asked a very, very good question. I thought everyone dealt with the whole thing very respectfully. There were a lot of riders, a lot of team managers, as you say, Pete, that crushed into the room to just see what is a historical announcement. The biggest man in our sport will not be a MotoGP rider after the end of this year. And can you imagine him going around to every Grand Prix on the sidelines? I can imagine him going rallying. I can imagine him, I can't imagine him packing in competitive sport. Whether he fits that round his MotoGP commitments, or whether MotoGP commitments get fitted around his rallying aspirations or car racing aspirations. Was it Domenicali who said that they, virtually offered him a deal at one point to drive for them, for Ferrari?
He tested, I think,
a
Sauber F1 car.
And he knocked him back for motorcycle racing, and that's a big deal. Like Valentino basically stayed with bikes because he loves motorbikes. He loves that whole rush that you get with a bike. And interesting as well that in the back of his mind when he did that press conference on Thursday will have been what could have happened a year ago at the same track, when you got 160 kilos of flying motorcycle going past your right ear hole, and he got away. Everyone got away hugely with the grace of God in that situation, I'm fairly sure, without any injury. So there are things that go through your mind as a rider that's close to the point of retiring, and that's the reason why there's no going back. Once you've kind of reached that decision, some deny it for a while, but I think Rossi has handled it, as you would expect, absolutely superbly well.
Well, it was a momentous day, a momentous weekend. It made all the headlines, of course, globally, and that's just how you can see how much of an impact he had. You wait 5 weeks of the summer break for all these announcements, and then they all come at once, don't they, just before the weekend? Because as well as this, which arguably overshadowed everything naturally, we did get another rider announcement as well, a little later on in the weekend. In fact, in one of the sessions, with both obviously Tech3 KTM riders, or we all knew that one of them would definitely be out in Petrucci and Lecuona, because obviously Remy Gardner has already got one seat. Where would the other seat go? And it has been announced that Raul Fernandez will be making the step up. So Tech3 are saying goodbye to Petrucci and Lecuona. They're both out the door. But Keith, I mean, the way they found out, obviously they knew, but the way it was announced was not particularly in the most sporting of ways, I thought.
Funny, I've been listening and reading all of the commentary across the globe, if you like, for this particular announcement. It's KTM. They're ruthless. Look what happened with Zarco. When Zarco quite graciously said, I'll leave at the end of the year because I'm not really getting on with the bike, but I'm giving you good notice now. And KTM basically said, okay, now
Bye.
You're gone. I think KTM are quite a ruthless bunch behind the scenes anyway. I think that it was disrespectful. FP4, hang on a second. There's guys out there on 200 mile an hour missiles that need their head fully on what they're doing. They need to be focused on what they're doing. They don't want it interfered with by some PR cock-up that's been made. And whatever the reasoning behind it, it was wrong to do it in that situation. You can't tell me that it made any difference to any contract at all that they had to announce it there and then. That's just bullshit if anybody says that. The fact is that deal was done. It didn't need announcing in FP4. That is for certain. If they were going to announce it, it should have been on the Thursday, or it should have been on the Sunday night after the event, or midweek this week between the two Austrian rounds. Whatever you say, I would imagine that Hervé Poncharal, and I haven't spoken to Hervé, so I don't know this for sure, but knowing the man well, Hervé Poncharal and Tech3 will be furious with the way it's been handled, because that is so not Hervé Poncharal. He's a real team man. He's a real rider man. And I just can't see the Frenchman allowing anything like it. It didn't come from him. It had got to come from KTM. KTM, they're the factory. They're the suppliers. They might be, and Pete will correct me on this, they probably hold the contracts for the two KTM riders anyway, Petrucci and Iker Lecuona. So it's down to KTM. Tech3, basically, the conduit that KTM are working through in an independent team. And so it's up to them when they make the press announcement. I think it was appallingly badly done. Funny how we're talking off the back of Valentino Rossi, where he got it absolutely bang on on this occasion, and KTM completely made a pig's ear of it. But there you go. Sometimes it goes that way.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it, Pete? But of course, we all, it was speculated, wasn't it, that Raul Fernandez was hotly tipped. But from sort of the rumblings and the outpouring of it, it seems like it wasn't his his priority to make the step up to MotoGP next season? In fact, it seems like he didn't want to be rushed, and a lot of the rumours have that KTM just needed to lock him down, and the only way to do that was to promote him perhaps a bit earlier than everyone had planned, because a lot of other teams and manufacturers were sniffing about the second place man in the Moto2 Championship.
This is it. It seems like KTM were definitely rattled by something, basically, and because of that, they rushed out this announcement. Now, as Keith says, that's no real excuse, really. I mean, it was during FP4. They could have waited 30 minutes and the track activities for the day would have been done. So, I mean, surely 30 minutes wouldn't have made much difference, would it? But still, it seems like Pit Byra's explanation on the Sunday morning to Simon Crafar was that, the other manufacturers have been, I think he used the words, ripping at the shirt of Raul. Now, it seems like, from what we hear, that certainly, Aprilia, but more Yamaha, as has been rumoured that they've been pursuing Fernandez, that they really didn't stop pursuing him. They really have been trying very hard, and they've been offering extremely long-term deals. I've heard numbers of 5 or 6 years. Now, clearly, KTM felt. Now, you might say, well, surely the contract was watertight, in which case, why worry about that? But then KTM were clearly worried enough to say, look, let's put this out there and make it public, presumably to just warn off the other factories. Now, you might say, well, why not leave Raul in Moto2 if that's maybe what he wanted, which is sort of the impression that he's given to Spanish TV. But it seems like maybe if they didn't take him for MotoGP, it might just leave a bit of a crack in his contract. Where someone else could creep in some way. It just reminded me of, the famous quote, the Formula One quote with Eddie Jordan, Ron Dennis, when Eddie lost Michael Schumacher to Benetton at the start of his career. He thought he had a contract. Benetton were able to get Schumacher, and Ron Dennis comes up to Eddie Jordan in pit lane and says, "Welcome to the Piranha Club." And I think it just had that feeling about it. KTM had a contract, but that doesn't stop the other factories going, yeah, but what's in the contract? Is it watertight? Is there some way that, because just a contract on its own is not enough. And so, yeah, clearly they were rattled into rushing it out. We don't know why. And so they've clearly sort of put a marker there and gone, look, he's with us next year in MotoGP, so leave him alone. Now, is that the end of the story? We'll have to see. Certainly from Petrucci's side, Petrucci's a very amiable, likeable chap. He, I was at his debrief straight after that session, the qualifying session, and, he wasn't ranting, he wasn't, banging his fist on the table. He was still sort of smiling and his usual self. But you could see he was clearly stung by the way it had happened. He spoke about people not answering the phone to him, and things like that. So he knew, he wasn't going to be part of their future plans. But he certainly said he was surprised by the behaviour of some people. And, he at the same time, he said, look, if I was in KTM's shoes, I would have signed Raul. So he understood the decision, but he certainly wasn't happy with the way it had happened and the way it had been communicated.
See this all the time, though. Contracts aren't that good. From a legal point of view, they're fantastic. From a personal point of view, you can get out of them if you want to get out of them. And who's going to force you to ride at 100% if you're not happy? Teams know that if a rider's not happy, he's not going to ride at 100%. It's a self-serving situation. It will go downhill one way or another. Look at Maverick Vinales. He's jumped the Yamaha contract at the moment, and he's got nowhere to go. Still, there's no announcements there. Aprilia are still casting their hook here, there, and everywhere at the moment at other riders. They're still looking at other riders all the time. Maverick Vinales, unlucky this weekend. I mean, the first part before he got red flagged, I know we'll probably talk about it in a moment, but really having to start from pit lane in the end was a disaster for him. At a time when he really needs to get his stock value back up again. He needs to prove to everybody that he is the man that he once was when it comes to racing a MotoGP bike. But contracts, seen them all the time. People chipping money off of riders, riders not fulfilling certain clauses within their contract, so losing out on huge amounts of cash, not being paid for bonuses. Seen it all. There's one particular team owner that we know very well, but I won't mention. But when you do a deal with him, quite often it's a 12-month deal, but you're only going to guarantee getting paid for 10 months, because pretty much he's not going to pay the last 2 months if he doesn't like you or you haven't performed. And that's how it is. It's the world that we live in. It is the Piranha Club. You're absolutely right, and this is the two-wheel version of it.
It really certainly is. Well, that is Petrucci and Lecuona out the door. Just on Lecuona lastly as well. Obviously, he's still quite young. He wants to stay in MotoGP if he can. There's been rumours about possibly going back to Moto2. He doesn't want to do that, whereas Petrucci seems like he could do a World Superbike switch. What about Lecuona next? Because he is still young.
Well, let's deal with Petrucci first, then Lecuona. I mean, Petrucci's, everyone's been talking about him going across the World Superbikes, but of course, Scott Redding's just fired a massive, great gunshot across his bows because Redding winning the final race from Most where they've been racing this weekend. Ducati have some horrible choices to have to make if they're going to bring someone like Petrucci in. Who's not going to be there? Will the team that Petrucci goes to be supported by the factory? It will need to be. Will Petrucci perform? This is the problem at the moment. When you look at where he's just come from in this weekend's racing, he's, back at the back of the field again. I mean, it's when you invest in somebody like Petrucci, somebody like Viñales that have been race winners, if they're off form, if they are down, if they are difficult to produce the absolute fine, what's the word I'm looking for? Circumstances that they need to go fast. If you've got a rider that's just too difficult to tune a team to get him to go quick, they've got such a lot of choices at the moment that they can look at that will perform in any given set of circumstances. If you've got to have all the ducks in a row every time for the likes of Viñales or for the likes of Petrucci for them to perform, and one duck is slightly skew whiff and he won't perform, then you would invest probably your millions in a younger rider that carries on trying and carries on performing even when things aren't quite 100% right for them. Tricky job now with everything being as close as it is. And it doesn't matter if it's Moto3, Moto2 or MotoGP. The racing, when you consider where we are with this, I mean, hats off to Dorna and in MotoGP circumstances, the manufacturers who work with Dorna to produce the rules that they produce. We have never been in a better position. An independent team wins a Grand Prix with a rookie. Effectively, an independent team is a privateer. If you go back to my day, that's what you considered to be a privateer. It's a private team. Obviously, it moved on a bit when factories got involved in private teams and offering up motorcycles that were a little bit more factory than the over-the-counter ones that you perhaps could ride back in the day. Now they're all factory teams, effectively, but it's still an independent team. And with that, you lose out on data engineers, perhaps, personnel. You've got less people usually that are working on those bikes and all the stuff that's going on back at the factory. It's going to be very interesting to see whether those teams are going to be able to pick up the pace. I love these back-to-backs because it's never quite as simple as, we've had a winner this week, Jorge Martin from pole, brilliant. Will he do it again next week? I don't think so, because that's what happens. Everyone's going to be now looking through the data, and that's where the factory teams really score. The top end, they'll be looking through that data and looking for all the fine detail, trying to get it sorted out for next weekend, and we're likely to see a completely different result.
Well, that'll certainly come in handy when we get to our predictions, which we were all terrible at this week.
Hey, I got the third place, man.
You got third place, man, but as I said off air, gets you no points, I'm afraid. Let's. Those are the big announcements before the racing action even got underway. And how long? 20 minutes in, and now should we talk about the race? So we were, of course, in Austria. This was the Styrian Grand Prix, and as you say there, Keith, it was Jorge Martin scored his second ever pole position after Quartararo had his lap time deleted. Now we had the first race start, which saw Bagnaia take an early lead actually from the pole sitter, and then there was a bit of jostling in the back. A couple of laps went by, and then we had this quite huge, scary crash on the face of it, which brought out a red flag for the incident between Dani Pedrosa and Lorenzo Savadori at turn 3. Pedrosa was around 12th, I think. He fell on the exit at the hairpin, and then Savadori, blind, unsighted from way back, hit the KTM on its side. Luckily, Pedrosa unhurt. Savadori looked visibly injured and has sustained some injuries, but could have been, I think they said this on commentary, a lot worse. He was talking to the marshals, but then that huge fire that broke out caused by a ruptured fuel tank. Keith, I don't think I've seen anything quite that severe in recent MotoGP times in terms of the flames that were there.